Well, this third portion of Chapter 2, we want to look at dietary supplements and health. And so we're going to give you a brief overview of the possible health effects of dietary supplements. As supplemental reading, I'd like you to read in your text pages 67 through 69 for more detailed information. Now, we want to start our discussion by talking about what dietary supplements actually are. And it's important to understand that they were first defined in 1994 by a piece of legislation that we call the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. And in order for a dietary supplement to be added to the total diet as a food product, it has to have at least one of those following ingredients that you see on your on this slide here. Now, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. According to ROC, about 40% of Americans use some sort of dietary supplement. And this shouldn't come as a surprise. How many of you out there take a daily vitamin? It's important to understand that this DSHEA requires that a dietary supplement cannot be represented as a conventional food or as a sole item of a meal or diet. It is a supplement to a meal or to a diet. Now, like foods, dietary supplements have to carry labels, or they have to carry supplement facts. Here we can see a picture of where we see a supplement fact, and we have a serving size, we have vitamin D and calcium. This one's talking about what its percent of the daily value is. So we see the nutrients in the amounts of those. We have suggested use, we have manufacture, and I think key there, we have the structure or function claim. In this example here, we're looking at a supplement that tells us that vitamin D assists in the absorption of calcium, and a healthy diet with adequate calcium is essential. Now, and that's great, so it's important that we know what the drug is supposed, or what the supplement is supposed to be doing, but I'd also point out that there's also an FDA disclaimer. And I think that's really important to read, which means that if there's a disclaimer there, it means it really hasn't been tested or evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. And so it's really not intended to prevent any disease. Now, once again, we have a separate lecture in Module 2 that talks just about food labels, supplement labels, and how to read them. And so make sure that you access that lecture in Module 2. That is part of your required reading for this module. I think the biggest question that we always ask ourselves when we're talking about supplements is that, will these supplements improve our health? And, you've heard me say it, if not once, twice, perhaps 3 times, that the best advice we can give you is to get your nutrients through whole, natural, or wholesome foods. In fact, the American Dietetic Association, the ADA, indicates that in its position statement when it says the best nutrition strategy is to wisely choose a wide variety of food. And once again, they're the term variety and moderation. However, it's important to note that that agency also says that sometimes you do need additional supplements for vitamins and minerals, and that will help people meet their nutritional needs as that are specified by the RDIs. Always remember that many times these products are mislabeled because they're not under the control or auspices of the FDA. And many times these herbal remedies that we take, or these herbal concoctions, are really not researched very well. So when we talk about who's going to decide whether these things work or not, the burden of proof is on the FDA. And if these substances have not been evaluated by the FDA, there's no proof that says what they're claiming is true. Back in 2010, we saw even more improvements in labeling, and we'll see that continue to come down the pipe for us. I find this quote by P. Thomas an interesting quote. It's an older quote, but I think it's I think it's an important one to point out. It comes back to eating those wholesome and natural foods. And he tells us that for most of us, the substances found in most dietary supplements are readily available in familiar and attractive packages called fruits, vegetables, legumes, fish, and other healthy foods. Once again, we can get these from our normal diet as long as we practice variety and moderation. But realizing, of course, that there are people that do take supplements. And so now our next question is, can they actually harm you? Well, the answer there is possibly. And the reason for that is because they aren't tested or supported by the FDA. They might give us a false sense of security where we don't eat right. We have this strange thought that if one is good, 10 must be better. So in excessive dosages, perhaps they're harmful. Many people take supplements as some sort of alternative medicine, and they do not do it under the guidance of their physician. Many supplements might actually be contraindicated if you are on some prescription medication. So you should not try to medicate yourself. Always talk to your pharmacist or to your physician. It's possible that they're contaminated. It's also possible that they might contain some harmful things like ephedra. Now on page 69 of your text, this goes into a bit more detail, and so I would certainly read that, especially if you are considering or if you are using supplements. Now there are some general safeguards that have been put out there by Consumers Union, and these safeguards or suggestions basically tell us that before you go to a supplement, before you go to that magic pill, maybe try to change your diet and your lifestyle first. Check with your doctor, especially with herbals, because they are not they're not monitored very well, and they might create some antagonistic responses with pharmaceuticals that you're on. Look for that USP rating. That's helpful, and that tells us it's a standardized product. That might help with some of the contamination. And really keep your eye open for any type of effect that you feel. If you experience any problems, then you should report the problems to your physician. Now, the Dietary Supplements Label Database contains information about label ingredients in more than 6,000 selected brands of dietary supplements. And basically, it's out there to enable the users to compare label ingredients in different brands. It's also there to provide information on those structure function claims made by some of the manufacturers. So this is kind of a cool website for you to go to. And perhaps you can check some of those dietary supplements that you're taking. Or if you're somebody who uses supplementation and you're caught between a rock and a hard place as to whether I should have brand X or brand Y, there's a great site for you to go to. It's monitored. It's a GOV site. When we look at that suffix, so it tells us there's some credible information, and it's monitored by the National Institute of Health. So let's look at some recommendations for better performance. We always come back to that this is a sport nutrition class. And in order for us to understand how to help nutrition play a role in improving our performance, we have to view the nutrition of a physically active person from two aspects. We have to look at it from the aspect of nutrition for training, and then we have to look at it from the aspect of nutrition for competition. And we also have to remember what these purposes of food are. They're to provide energy, regulate metabolic processes, and promote growth and development. Those are the three purposes of food. And the first two, energy, metabolic, and the one for metabolic processes, are very important for competition, while all three of those are important for training. So what should you eat during training? Well, there's an indication that the main role of nutrition for the athlete is there to support consistent intensive training. Chris Carmichael notes that you need to match your intake to the demands of your training, so it's individualized. Chris Carmichael, it's interesting to note, is the coach and nutritionist for 7-time Tour de France champion Lance Armstrong, so I think he probably knows what he's talking about. But you have to evaluate what you're doing in training, and then you have to make sure that your intake is there to match that. Go back and think about that scale. When we talked about the really big factors in a healthful diet, that was that first consideration. So what are some considerations? Well, we come right back to those 12 steps, the prudent healthy diet that I was referring to just recently. And that should be your basic diet plan. We also have to look at this situation that we call the chronic training effect. That we have to really focus on adequate intakes in our early training, because we're going to use up all of our stores that we have. And once we use up the stores, and if we don't have the adequate intakes as we start this training process, we're going to be in a catch-up phase, and we're never going to catch up. And then we're going to suffer from what we call this chronic training effect. A chronic injury is something that comes on over time. And once you have some sort of a chronic injury, it's hard to get rid of. And so it's the same thing with this chronic training effect. People that are poorly nourished and do not have a well-balanced diet that comes from a variety of food sources to make sure they're getting all their proper energy, nutrients, and they're also getting all their vitamin and minerals and other food substances, really are dependent on their stores when they start in an intensive training program. And man, you can see that on kids, especially kids that come from high school to the collegiate ranks. And they're away from home, so the mom or dad is no longer cooking their meal for them. They're dependent upon their own choices, and sometimes make bad choices. And they get behind early on. And by mid-season, we have all sorts of problems with them. So it's really important that you focus on those intakes right away in the beginning. The timing is also important, and we'll talk about timing a little bit. John Hawley notes that we're going to have some real beneficial effects of training during that recovery period. If we don't recover well, it's hard for us to get back out into that next training regimen. And nutrition can be part of that story. And really importantly is breakfast. Breakfast is a very important meal for the athlete. So let's look at breakfast for the athlete. And I'm going to point out here there's some additional required reading in this module. It's called Fueling the Athlete, and we spend a lot of time talking about breakfast in that article. You can find that in Module 2 as well, and that has also been provided for you not just as a Word document, but also as an EPUB document, which means that if you have a Kindle, or if you have a Nook, or if you have an iPad or an iPhone, you can actually download it to your bookshelf, and you can in your iTunes account or other accounts, and you can read that right on the roll. So it is made into an electronic article as well. So let's talk a little bit about breakfast. Breakfast is especially important during training. And I guess the first question I always start out here is, how many of you out there listening right now eat breakfast daily? And I'm going to guess a few of you are raising your hand. The rest of you are right now thinking about excuses, that if I were asking you this question in some sort of reflection or assignment that you're writing, you're coming up with your excuse, aren't you? I don't have time. I have an early class. I'm not a breakfast eater. And we have all of those kind of excuses. And if we're an athlete, none of those work. Because breakfast is really important for us, because it provides a significant amount of our calories and other nutrients that we need in our daily diet. Skipping breakfast is comparable to a small fast. It's just as if you would not eat for 12 to 14 hours. Now, think about that. Would you ever, if you're an athlete, not eat for 12 to 14 hours? No, but we do it all the time if we don't eat breakfast. Now, we hear it all the time, I don't have time. Well, it simply takes getting up a little bit earlier in order to eat breakfast. And for you on a tight schedule, here's a great menu. This is suggested by Nancy Clark. She's a nationally acclaimed sport nutritionist. I heard her speak at a symposium several years ago. Extremely interesting. If you ever get a chance to listen to her speak, don't miss it. She's authored a number of really great books out there. But her suggestion is this. How about a bowl of fortified high-fiber cereal with skim milk and fruit? And you know what? That's it. You're pouring it out of a box. You're pouring some skim milk on it, and you maybe are going to throw some strawberries on it, blueberries on it, peaches on it, whatever you may want, whatever fruit, bananas, whatever you have there. And you throw that on that cereal. Now, how quick and easy is that? Well, it's not only quick and it's easy, but it's healthy. It's rich in carbs. It's rich in fiber, iron, calcium, vitamins, all of those nutrients that are so important to an athlete's diet. And I'll point you in the direction of this last bullet as well. Going to class on a full stomach also gives you a full brain. So what should you eat just prior to competition? Well, here I'm going to bring once again your attention to your textbook. And if you go to page 77, there's some really great information here that tells us really what we should be consuming. And I'd like you to make sure that you read some of that, because there's some really major things there that you want to be concerned with. But we want to just kind of focus on those major goals of this pre-competition meal. And it's really a lot of it about timing and composition. When you have that pre-competition meal, you really want to allow that stomach to be fairly empty. And the reason for that is you want to help minimize any distress. And when I talk about at the start of the competition, you want the stomach to be empty, and that's going to help minimize this GI distress. And so there's where timing is a real issue. So in general, if you're going to eat a solid meal, we're talking about 3 to 4 hours prior to competition. And that allows enough time for you to digest that meal. And then you come back to these interviews and say, well, I like to eat like half an hour before the softball game, or I like to eat about half an hour before the volleyball match. Some people function very well that way, and they like that feeling of being full. But what they don't get from eating that soon or that late and that close to the start of competition, they don't get any benefit from the nutrients, because the digestive system is all but going to shut down once you start exercising, and so they don't get any benefit from those energy calories. We always want to make sure we're providing an adequate amount of water. So part of that pre-competition meal should be foods that are easy to digest, and it should be about hyperhydration. Now, here's 2 examples of some pre-competition meals. You notice they're 500 to 600 calories, so we're not going in and pigging out at either one of these meals, but we're eating food choices that are high in carbohydrates, easily digestible. We still have protein, and we're still going to get our fruits and vegetables, minerals and vitamins. And so meal A here: orange juice, oatmeal, toast and jelly, some peaches with skim milk. 500 to 600 calories. We're going to digest real quickly. We're going to get what we're shooting for here. Another example, maybe that person that wants to feel a little bit fuller. And maybe this is a noon meal. We might have morning competitions. We might have afternoon or evening competitions. Here we're talking about a cup of low-fat yogurt, a banana, a bagel, some turkey breasts, and a half cup of raisins. Just about the right amount of food to really kickstart our competition. And I would put that with the codicil that, or the expectation that you're already on a well-balanced diet. When we talk about planning meals for competition, if you have an event in the morning, you want to eat something that's similar to meal A, because you want it to be similar to breakfast. If you have a early to mid-afternoon, it's a breakfast and lunch, so you might want to have a little bit more substantial breakfast along with maybe some of those things that went on in meal 2. The key is you want to make sure you're consuming breakfast, lunch, and supper, keeping that 3 to 4 hour window out there for your food to digest. You shouldn't be skipping meals. How about during competition? There's really most times no need to consume anything during most competitions, with the exception of perhaps carbohydrates and water. And the carbohydrates can come to us in the form of a sports drink. And we'll discuss specific nutrients through this course as is merited. Now, we talked about in a few slides ago that recovery is really key to performance. And so we have to be concerned about what we're eating after competition that will help us in the recovery. It's also important to understand that many athletes compete several times during a day, and so they're going to perhaps eat between competitions. For example, those people at volleyball tournaments, tennis tournaments, swim meets, track and field meets. So here the focus has to be on the pregame meal with an eye on carbohydrate-rich foods or fluids, and then a moderate protein intake. Once again, in general, a balanced diet is going to meet this, and we'll talk about the protein intake when we get to Chapter 6. Should an athlete be consuming commercial sports foods? Well, although convenient, many of these don't contain all the healthful nutrients that we find in natural foods. And what are these substances that we're talking about? Liquid sport meals, sport bars, sport gels, and candy, sports supplements. They shouldn't be a substitute for a healthy diet. They may be convenient, and they may be appropriate immediately before, during, or after competition or training, but they shouldn't be replacing your diet, which remember is going to have variety, and we're going to do it in moderation. I think the big problem and the big challenge that we see for both athletes and for coaches is, what do we do when we're on the road? And I've blocked out a little bit that, and I'm sorry about that, but the message there is perhaps you should carry your own food. So, as I said earlier, it's a real challenge. And as a collegiate coach for 23 years, I can testify to that challenge. Try to make sure that your kids are eating a healthful diet that's going to benefit the competition, benefit their recovery. Now, this doesn't mean that you can never eat fast food. You certainly can eat fast food, but you have to study the nutritional material, and you have to make wise choices. At any fast food restaurant, there are poor choices and there are better choices. If you look at Appendix F in your text, you'll find the fat percentage of many specific fast food products. But if you're going to carry your own sack lunch, here are some suggestions of things that you could bring with you. Certainly, as a volleyball coach, we spent many days packing coolers for long tournaments. And when I look at this list, many of the things that are on this list are the things that we were packing. Trying to find enough time, remember, because in a volleyball tournament, track meet, things of that nature, you have competition, you have rest, you have competition, so you have a lot of maybe pre-competition meals in there that you're consuming. Once again, select those healthy choices. And so here are some suggestions for some healthy choices. Doesn't mean we can't go to Perkins, but it means maybe we don't have or Denny's, we don't have their Grand Slam. Or the Magnificent 12 or whatever that is at Perkins that you consume. There are good choices for us. And so we have to always, as coaches, we have to help our athletes make those good choices. Do gender and age influence requirements for enhancing physical performance? There are really few differences between male and females as far as the nutritional needs. Males might need a few more calories because they have larger body sizes in some sports. Female athletes, endurance athletes, might oxidize a little bit more fat, which means they can consume a little bit more fat. We know that adolescents and young females, because of the growth factor in tissue with the adolescent, but in young females, the menstrual cycle, they need more iron. We also know that eating disorders are more common in females. When we talk about age, well, we need more calories when we're younger. And we can consume more calories when we're younger because our metabolic rate is much higher. So it's easier for us to balance that scale. Older athletes will need fewer calories, but they're going to have more vitamin B12 and more vitamin D and more calcium. And both groups here, whether we're young athletes or older athletes, we really need to use caution while we're exercising in the heat. And once again, I would advise that you read through in your chapter, page 81 and 82. It gives us some particular information about gender and age. And should clarify, when we talk about older athletes here, we're not talking about 18-year-olds. We still would probably consider them more in that younger athlete age. We'd be talking more about some of those more senior athletes. So that takes us through chapter 2 as we talk about the consumer athlete. And the whole point of this discussion was to try to make you a little bit wiser as to some of those choices that we make that influence our pocketbook. And those things that influence our pocketbook also influence our health. In chapter 3, we're going to be looking at the human energy system, and that will be a very brief discussion. We talk about the human energy system in a lot of different classes in this curriculum, so we're not going to be going overboard and turning into a biochemistry class, but I think it's important that we just have a review or at least a basic understanding of how we produce energy in the human body.